Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongo Shampagi. The debate or the probe going on by Parliament's Committee on Statutory Authorities and State Enterprises, COSASE, is handling but one part. A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongo Shampagi. We're looking tonight at the probe by Abdul Katuntu and the COSASE Committee in Parliament on the Bank of Uganda. And asking the question, looking beyond that investigation, what are the other questions that the committee may not have handled as yet or should be handling on that bank probe of the central bank and the closure of 7 banks? Remember that this is something that's been going on for some time. The bank started closing, I think, around 1999. And the latest one was closed recently, which is Crane Bank. We have tonight in studio a financial expert, Mr. Stephen Kaboyo, from Managing Director of Alpha Capital Partners. Stephen, very nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Good evening, viewers.
You have a history with Bank of Uganda. You worked with it before.
Yes.
You did. Thank you very much. Very nice to have you. I'll be asking what this means. What is it that we're missing? We also have, in 1999, when the cooperative bank was closed, one gentleman was flashed on the headlines of newspapers as the biggest data of the cooperative bank. And one of the major questions that is emerging out of the investigation by COSASE and the special audit that was done by the Auditor General of the closure of Crane Bank is managing the loan book. What exactly is going on? And actually managing the closure of various banks is the loan book. So if you have one of the people who was registered as the biggest data to the cooperative bank, what exactly is happening with other datas and how that has been handled. But Mr. Christo Shave.
Thank you, Charles.
Very nice to have you.
Good evening, the viewers.
We'll be wanting to hear from you, your own side of the story, as a representative of some of the people who have been, the silent victims of the closure of banks. Because you're looking at the owners of these banks, you're looking at the institution. You're not looking at the people behind these banks. Let me start with you, Stephen. And that's the question. One of the major concerns over the last few weeks and months that the Abdul Katuntu Committee has been probing and questioning officials of the central bank, particularly the central bank governor, the deputy central bank governor, the former director of bank supervision, and other officials, is that you're getting an institution that by the nature of its work should ideally be shielded or has been shielded by the law from a lot of this scrutiny. And the question has been, yes, the shielding is one part of the story. How has the central bank used its authority? And the question is, what does a probe like the one Katuntu and his team of members of parliament are doing mean for the central bank?
Thank you, good Charles. That's a very good question. I think I'll start by saying that, or maybe flipping your question to say that was this probe actually necessary? Mm-hmm. My answer to that is yes. The independence of the central bank notwithstanding, I think there is justification to scrutinize the central bank. Like what is going on. It's not unusual, and in many central banks, where a governor is called on one-on-one or groups to meet elected leaders and discuss issues pertaining to the policy structures of an institution like a central bank. Basically, a central bank high prestige generates public expectations. Mm-hmm. That's one. 2, perhaps the manner the probe has been conducted may have taken a different approach, but basically achieving the same objective. My own concern is that perhaps this probe could have been in camera, where there is limitation in terms of the reputational damage to the institution, which is quite sensitive to the economy of the country. Having said that, it's correct. Scrutinize an institution like a central bank for accountability, because this is a public institution, and also provide checks and balances to ensure that if things had gone wrong, perhaps this probe will result into reforms going forward.
People have been looking at this and asking, we've had multiple probes before in this country. Do they achieve anything, actually? So can an investigation, especially by a committee of parliament, how much more can it achieve if its report is on advisory to the executive?
I think what this probe has done is to open up a lot of things that the public did not know. I'll tell you, having worked in the central bank, supervision of financial institutions was always has always been a closed sort of setting in terms of releasing information. Because I think the whole issue has been about sensitivity of the financial sector and how much information can go out there in the public without causing anxiety. Now, to me, there are, of course, internal challenges within the central bank. I've seen a lot of issues relating to the governor perhaps not supervising his staff effectively. I would say, having worked with the governor, having been in the central bank with the governor is a person who has this approach of process-driven management. He believes in processes and the people behind those processes. Now, once the current governor gains confidence in you and the trust, he'll give you a room to execute. In this particular case, I think his confidence and trust was abused by senior supervisors in the bank. So really, you cannot say, and the way the nature of the bank relating to supervision issues is concerned, I think at some stage, because the structure of the bank, there is a department, there is a functional head. In my own assessment, I can see that they were choosing what information to give the government.
Yes. So did he sleep on the job, or did they build a castle around him? Did he build a castle around himself that every information that goes to him was sieved? Because what's coming out of COSASE, of the investigation, is shocking and disturbing. How much did he know? When did he know what? And even before COSASE started this investigation, following the closure of Crane Bank, for example, there were reports that the governor was upset because he realized very late that a lot of information had been kept away from him.
That is true. And like I said, the nature of the bank and the reporting mechanisms, a functional head is so powerful that they can be able to decide what to share and what not to share. Like I said,
including with the governor.
Including the governor, yes. And what you see coming out here, it's really governor having not working with the full deck of cards in order to make decisions. He was given half-baked information, and that is what led to the changes that we saw early in the year.
But how does the central bank governor explain this? I mean, even at a personal level, how does he explain this? That it happens in the case of the first bank that was closed, which was Tefe. It happens in the case of the second bank that gets closed, a third bank that gets closed, a fifth bank, a sixth, and a seventh.
Now, I think we'll probably have to excuse the current governor because he wasn't there for the first four.
Yes. So he's executed about on three.
The three.
Yes.
The three. But like I said, he's a process-driven individual. He believes in the systems. He believes in processes. However, in this particular case, I think he was let down by his own technical staff. Yeah.
Are you surprised that the banks were being closed and there are no reports about their closure?
Now, I think that causes, that is where some issues really lie, because how do you close banks and there are no liquidity reports, liquidation reports? prepared to be able to close the processes, because it cannot be an open-ended process. It has to come to an end at some point. So I think there are questions there that need to be answered by people who slept on the job, using your word. But while really the executive management roles still lie with the governor, I think supervision function did not do its job.
Okay, just one more question before I turn to Chris. Looking at what has been going on, there are people who are skeptical. No, actually skeptical is the wrong word. Cynical about the Abdul Katuntu committee itself. And they're saying, the people who have been alleging that some of the members might be acting simply as hired hands, others saying they might be just acting for the gallery, that they cannot actually, or maybe they do not have the technical expertise to understand and to be able to break down the complicated language of managing financial institutions to be able to get the right answers from the central bank and make recommendations that can actually, one, keep the financial sector stable, but two, cause the necessary reforms within the central bank, and three, to be able to cause those reforms without tearing the whole thing apart.
I think, Charles, let me also say that one other fundamental issue is the sort of overstaying in one place. When, again, going by the nature of the central bank, you find the average time or work time in supervision for the senior managers is 20 plus years. That's a very long time to stay in one place. In many central banks, they don't let you stay that long. They rotate you because of the potential bias and due for bearings that come along with that. So when you have somebody in one place for 20, 25, 30 years, they became complacent. It's business as usual. There is nothing. It is a two-way sword. While they build skills and capacity and become experts of sorts, but there is the other downside, that they can become complacent and take things for granted. And I think that is the situation we are in right now. Mr.
Chris Tushaba, let me turn to you. I've read your story. I've listened to. You for the last 20 plus years.
Yes.
You were projected in national newspapers as the biggest data of Cooperative Bank. Can I just hear a little bit of your own story?
Thank you, Charles, and viewers. First of all, I want to thank you, Charles, for giving us the opportunity, especially me, and the management of NTV, giving us the opportunity, especially me, to talk about what I've been going through, which could help the management of the Bank of Uganda, even the president in his office, and the nation. Was projected as the biggest data. Definitely that was very unfair, because I left public office in 1992 and went to Kasese and started business. I was buying coffee, produce, and had transport, and I was doing so well. I was actually banking with the UCB first, Uganda Commercial Bank. Then I opened an account with the Cooperative Bank in 1993, and Cooperative Bank fished me because of the amount of money I used to have and give them. And they allowed me to keep some of the money, liquid cash, in their strong room. And
so you're keeping your own money,
yes,
in the strong room of the bank, but
and
you had not banked it.
I could bank some on the account, but then they were keeping some more money in their own room, strong room. So because of the activities of the ADF, I was convinced also to bring some of the money to Kampala head office under a facility which they called voice line facility, and they kept it for me. And because the bank was not operating TT facilities and it was not yet computerized, checks would take long to be cleared. So that is the privilege they gave me. And because of that, they also offered me a facility overdraft, the highest they could give to an individual of 600 million by then.
Mm.
So by the time the bank closed, I had nothing of this money. So when they say I was the biggest debtor, of course I was also one of the biggest losers as an individual. But Charles,
so they'd extended to you an overdraft facility of 600 million. So you
yes,
owed the bank 600 million, didn't you?
they extended to me an overdraft of 600 million, but I had not used it. By the time the bank closed, they had taken all that money, my money, including that overdraft, which I had not used yet. But anyway, to allow me to divert a bit, and because I became interested in what Mr. Kawayo talked about, the probe, according to him, yes, people would think that maybe it could be secret, but that's when things are normal. To me, corruption has been so abnormal that things don't need to be secret. Definitely, I understand that there will be some issues which they will have to have in the camera. But again, we Ugandans also want to have confidence. We have been hurt and we want to see what is taking place. And I think I commend the committee of Katuntu for allowing us to see what is happening. And also, especially some of us who have been struggling and crying, to the president. I personally have been writing very many letters.
I've seen
to
some
the
of the letters.
president, yes. But they took time, and 20 years I've been suffering, and now he has seen it. And now when I agree that the governor was let down, because some of the people, some of the issues are, and I believe he have had listened to me also, giving me an opportunity. Time is not yet over. If he can give me an opportunity, he will see how he let himself down.
But
also.
you've written to the president, and the
Yes.
president has written back to you, meaning that he has
yeah,
had your
I'm still
issues.
on the issue of the governor being let down by people close to him. But also the president has been let down by people close to him. Because trusting people so much is very dangerous also. With this corruption, I know that the president has the will to fight corruption, but his people has let him down.
Let's
So I want to stop. I want to just
let's
close
just go
there.
back. Yes, let's just go back to your story.
Yes.
You had an overdraft facility.
Yes.
You had money in the bank.
Yeah.
What happened to that money? How did it disappear?
As I told you that they offered me a facility which was obviously a facility. I didn't exactly know how they were operating it. The money would be, information would be wired to the manager in Kasese. Then he would release money, and also vice versa. They had coded the words. They could not give them to me. But I had over 3 billion shillings. I had properties worth 1.4 billion, which I had pledged for this 600 million facility overdraft, which I had not used. Today, when the bank closed, I don't have a single shilling, and I'm indebted because of the frauds that were visited onto my account, and they have been proved, and the bank does not even deny that. But before going that way, let me first tell you and tell the viewers why I have come here. When I had Honorable Katuntu telling us that he was going to interview only the directors of the banks and maybe to consider the Auditor General's report, then I knew we are going to lose a lot. Because that is according to records that are going to be available. But there are certain things which are also not on record. Banks were closed with frauds, and the frauds continued until even the official liquidators left them. Up to this day, frauds are still going on. So I felt that the Auditor General definitely must have worked on the information he was given, like the liquidators. For example, the official liquidator of the cooperative bank was not given all the documents. My documents were kept away from him, all that money. He left in 2001, and they were brought to me 2004. They wanted money, they wanted me to buy them. So there is a lot of information that these liquidators never got.
Let's go back step by step. I need our viewers, for the benefit of our viewers, to understand, and other people, because you are not the only banker with cooperative bank, and you're not the only person who had date with the cooperative bank. There are possibly many other people who share your story, regardless of the bank in which they were keeping their money. So I want to understand, when the bank is closed and you are published in the newspaper as the top data, there were others who were below you. You were number 1, there was number 2, there was number 3, number 4, number 5, depending on the size of the money that you owed the bank at that time to the least person.
Yes.
What happened? You say you had you had properties that you had mortgaged
Yes.
to secure the overdraft facility.
Yes.
If you had 3 billion shillings in the bank, why would you want to secure an overdraft facility?
Well, you see, when you are doing business and checks take time to clear and you have to pay cash, you need cash. That was the facility, overdraft facility. So that while checks were being cleared, by then they would take a month or 2 weeks or a month. So during that time when the checks are cleared, you could use money from the bank as a facility and you would pay it back. And for the benefit of viewers anyway, the bank closed when I had a very terrible misfortune. My business premises had been burnt.
By
And
who?
I had lost, they said we were having ADF activities there, but from how the bank reacted, it is still, I don't want to commit myself. Because when my premises were burnt and I lost all those documents, I came to the bank manager to ask him for records, copies. He refused to give them to me. And he told me he would get permission from Kampala first. I came to Kampala, those records were refused. I was never given a single document. The bank closed, I was never given a single document. When the Bank of Uganda took over, I thought I was going to get a relief. But later on, I found it was worse. It became so difficult. Some of the officials in the Bank of Uganda became so difficult for me that again I thought I prayed it had not if it had not been closed. As I talked today, Governor Bank of Uganda, I have not received my documents.
Which documents are you referring to?
Bank documents. I lost bank documents. I lost the copies of the deposit slips. I wanted the checks I had issued. I was never given any single document until recently, until after about 2004, when a few documents were released to me on certain conditions, which I rejected. And when I rejected, that's when I appealed to the president. I wanted him to look at this confusion and the bribery that was taking place and the fraud that were taking place during the time our banks were being closed.
Okay, we need, I'm being advised that we need to take a quick commercial break, but let me just throw this out to you two gentlemen. We'll pick them up after the break. For you, Chris Toshabe, yes. The question I want to put to you is, one, the bank thought you actually playing it. They did not believe that you had a genuine case before them. Number two is that you took your case to the president, but you also took the matter to court. And you agreed on a consent judgment with the central bank. Why was that matter not rested by the court process? And to Mr. Stephen Kabaya, I want to put this question before we take the break. That, is it normal if I'm a banker within a bank today and I cannot track the checks I have issued to the bank, how do I go about asking for that record from my bank? What's the law on that? What's the practice? But we'll take a commercial break and pick this up in a moment. still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're discussing beyond the COSASE investigation of the central bank. What are the other questions that have not been asked or should be asked? And we have with us in studio a financial expert, Stephen Kaboyo, from his managing director of Alpha Capital Partners. We also have one of the people, a businessman, Chris Tushave. He was projected as the biggest data of the cooperative bank when it was closed in 1999. He spent the last 20 years following through courts, through the central bank itself, and appeals to the political leadership in this country, particularly the president, thinking or saying that he was unjustly treated because he got an overdraft facility, and he says he never received the money because the money was still in the bank system before the bank was closed. So before I come back to you, Stephen, let me just go back to Mr. Tushave. I have learned preparing for this show and before hearing about your story and the many letters, the many correspondences you have written to the president especially, and to the central bank itself, and through the court file of your case that ended in arbitration. Would it end in a consent judgment? Did it end in a consent judgment?
It's something I will explain. Nothing has ended.
Yes, the bank, and particularly the central bank governor, believes actually that you were a fraud, that you played the bank, both cooperative bank and the central bank, and that you had no genuine claim before it. How do you respond to that?
Exactly, that has been the problem. If he believes, has he ever given me an opportunity and I sit with him and I tell him my story? No, for 20 years.
Of course, he wasn't,
If he had,
wasn't in charge then.
That is what we are talking about. He's the governor. He's supposed to be fair to me. Has he ever given me an opportunity? And we sit and I show him the cases. Moreover, that one is a going case because my case was investigated by the IGG and some of the auditors, and they approved all those claims that I put forward. When somebody says I am playing it, if I am really playing it, are you right to refuse me my right also? Because the bank is supposed to give me my documents. The bank is supposed to give me the financial the record of my account with them. They have not given me anything. I lost my documents before the bank closed. I put my complaint to police. When they were helping me, the bank closed, Bank of Uganda took over. And I thought the Bank of Uganda, having taken over, it was going to correct that mistake. But the problem they did, the people who had carried on those frauds, running the cooperative bank, and who had refused to give me my documents, were retained to liquidate the same bank. And I later on found that these people who were retained had previously worked with the Bank of Uganda. So a syndicate was created to the extent that today, Bank of Uganda does not feel ashamed that up to 20 years, they have not given me my documents. And that is my right. Now, the reason why I went to the president, 2004, when the official liquidator had gone, and this is what why I appealed to Abdu Katuntu, that the Auditor General does not have all that information. Because what the Auditor General has, I believe, was what was given to him by the liquidator. How about that information, which the liquidator never got? And I have got that proof that the liquidator never got it. So that is why I went to the president to expose the corruption that was going on. Remember, Charles and viewers, I was one of the biggest shareholders as an individual with 10,000 million, yes, 10 million shares of shares, worth of shares. And we struggled to ensure that this bank does not close. We were ready to recapitalize it. But Pilate had already written what I have written, And I think that's why I think maybe the governor gets annoyed with
Why hasn't the president listened to you? Why do you think the president hasn't listened to you?
That is the challenge. The president has listened to me. But I believe, as Mr. Kaboyo has said, the president does not work alone. he is giving people to work with and they give him a report. For example, honestly, if I was the president and the governor brought a report, I would not believe Chris and leave the governor. But this probe is going to show that the governor has been giving the president wrong reports about me. That's why I thank God for this. I thank God for this probe. I thank God for viewers.
Let me put this question. Because I don't have the central bank here to defend itself or to explain its own position. And of course, it is on the boiling pot before COSASE. I don't want to be unfair to the central bank unnecessarily without giving them an opportunity to speak out. Okay. Though they haven't been very proactive in providing people to speak for the central bank outside of the probe committee. So in spite of the fact that we have tried to reach out to the central bank to provide the opportunity before, they haven't taken up the opportunity. But my question is, why do we find that of all the people who owed money to closed banks, it's only Chris Chavez that stands out and has been on this crusade alone for the last 20 years? And there are other people, wouldn't you have worked with other former daters of, for example, the Cooperative Bank, daters of Tefe Bank, daters of Greenland Bank, daters of National Bank of Commerce, daters of Crane Bank, if that was the case?
It is on record.
Why is this a long journey?
It is on record that I was called the biggest debtor, and it was my personal business, and the money was mine. And I think, to be fair, as you said, when I say something, it is good. I also need to explain why I've said so. That the president on 6th October 2009 wrote to the governor to investigate my complaint so that he can advise him on the best course of action. Up to this day, I'm waiting for the governor because I think it is proper. Because I was given a copy and I'm the complainant, the governor has never called me. And I think I'm still waiting for him to call me.
I believe he's watching.
So that's why I'm saying, that's why I'm saying that when the president is fighting corruption, I believe people who are close to him don't give him corrective.
Have you been given an opportunity to appear before the COSASE committee?
Exactly. Now, I thank you very much for that question. And for the benefit of viewers, this is what I wrote to Abdul Katuntu. I said, Honorable Abdul Katuntu, Chairman, COSASE Parliament of Uganda, on 31st October 2018, request to extend the scope of consultations on fraudulently closed banks. It has been reported that COSASE will handle issues raised by the Auditor General only and then interview board members of the closed banks. Sir, the Auditor General's report may not contain sufficient information because as the banks were liquidated fraudulently, a lot of information was deliberately hidden from the official liquidators, and some of this information was released later for money after the liquidators had long closed their work. For example, during the liquidation of Cooperative Bank, the officers under whose management the bank had closed due to frauds, and some of whom had been employees of Bank of Uganda, were retained to liquidate the same bank. These officers formed a syndicate, and the frauds went on throughout the liquidation exercise until the official liquidator left. Complaining against any officer to a supervisor in the Bank of Uganda was so hazardous as a cat bailing a rat. I mean a rat bailing a cat. So I said...
You may not have to read the whole letter.
I don't have to read it. What do I mean? That's why I asked Honorable Katuntu, we are shareholders. We are Ugandans. We are pained. If you follow only what the Auditor General wrote, there is a lot of information that you are going to leave behind, and the Ugandans will still bleed. We implore you to allow us an opportunity.
I believe the Honorable Abdul Katuntu and members of Parliament on that, particularly Abdul Katuntu views or watches this show religiously. So I know he's watching, and he'll share with us some information as we go along. and whether he's considering your petition to him or not. Let me turn to Stephen Kaboyo. I asked a question just before we took the break. One, if I have documents with the bank and I lose my copies, what is the practice? What is the policy? How do I get those copies?
I think, Charles, the standard practice really is a customer is entitled to have access to his or her bank records, no matter what happens. If you go back and at the time of Cooperative Bank, Charles's story, Chris's story in 1999, I think computerization had not totally taken over, but I believe there were ledgers at that stage as well. So I think there is no bank customer cannot be told that there are no records at all. Those records must be there. One thing, I'm not a lawyer, but there is what they call statute of limitations in other markets where I'm familiar with. I don't know the statute of limitation in Uganda and how many years.
I think it's 6 years for Uganda.
Records can be kept. But in these bank cases where liquidation reports have never been concluded, it means that the process is still going on because clearly those have not been cited, the reports. So for Mr. Tushabe's case, I think he has a genuine case. He needs to be listened to. The bank may have, before this whole thing came up, may have used the Bank of Uganda up to now. Nobody had ever questioned or even taken it on to say, look, explain what are you doing? But this probe brings to bear all these issues. And really, my expectation is there are lessons that we need to pick from this going forward. Avoiding conflict of interest, impartiality, and transparency when you're dealing with financial institutions and financial matters as a regulator. That is key. Ethical code of conduct. You cannot be too big to say, I will not talk to Mr. Tushabe. Mr. Tushabe is a customer, is a bank as a regulator. You need to listen to him. So I think he has a case which he needs to be listened to. But really, in terms of accessing his records,
he should be able to access his records.
Absolutely.
Now, looking at the institution, the financial institution broadly, the Central Bank of Uganda, and particularly the governor, has been winning awards internationally. He's been credited, both him and his predecessors have been credited for stabilizing the financial sector in this market. And many people believe he's an excellent banker. He's an excellent economist for the work he's done. And until this probe, until the closure of Crane Bank, because it's Crane Bank that's blown this thing apart. The other banks were closed and it ended fairly quietly. It's this one that has brought all the scrutiny that we're witnessing today. Do you think that the probe, the way it's going at the moment, hurts more than builds the central bank?
That's a very, very interesting dimension that you introduce. Now, to me, when you look at what is going on, this is unprecedented. Central bank has never experienced what they are going through right now. This has been a very, very bad year for the central bank. Now, for me, going back to the point we started with, is the probe could have been done differently and achieve the same objective to limit the damage. Because when you look at the core responsibilities, let's speak on two key responsibilities of the central bank. One is monetary policy, the other one is financial stability. Now, there are other things, other operations that relate to payment systems, exchange rate, currency management. Now, the moment you dent the credibility of the central bank, you run a high chance of all this damage, flipping over or running over into these other aspects. And then the credibility question becomes an issue. Now, would the public have confidence that in other areas, say monetary policy, the central bank is doing a good job? There, you can say the expertise is different, but perhaps they're doing a very good job. You've just touched on a governor being given accolades all over the world. True, this is a man who has been at the heart of the economic development of this country since the NRM government came in place. Giving credit where it's due, he has done a good job. The failure that
how do you feel that he's been taken through this kind of humiliation that he's going through at the moment? I mean, looking at the fallen figure that he presents before Kosase, together with his quite respected economists beside him, the deputy governor, you have directors in the central bank. What are they going through?
It is tough to me to really expose and bring the central bank governor every day sit in that committee, and sometimes when you watch, he doesn't say much. He does not say much because really the rug was pulled under his table by the technical team that he depended on for a long time. But that notwithstanding, we have to be careful that the impact is there. We cannot deny that this has dented the central bank credibility, and restoration is going to take a very long time to come back because it is ugly. It's bad. It's bad. So
is this a sensitive economy? Because you track the response by the behavior, for example, of the exchange rate. If the central bank is going through what it's going through, and it manages the currencies, you would determine by seeing activity on the stock market. This seems to be quite following a normal trend. I mean, on any other day, in any other year, on any other month, the exchange rate would go as haywire as going at the moment. The stock market would remain as static as it has been. You don't see these shocks. So from a technical perspective, how do you feel that this probe is impacting on the financial sector broadly and the economy?
To me, markets have been calm. When you look at what has been going on, there's been no knee-jerk reaction because of the BOU probe. But we cannot completely discount it and say markets have, say, priced the turmoil at the central bank and everything is normal. As we go forward, because I think the other stage that the probe is getting into, Crane Bank, is going to be another one. And I think Crane Bank being one of those significant and large banks, it may even bring a little bit more than what we have seen. For me, the issue is it is too far in the process to perhaps, just like efforts were made last week by the Minister of Finance to intervene and say, look, let's limit the damage because of confidence issues. It may be too late, but really the whole issue is the reputation of this august institution is damaged, but purely on supervision and regulation of the financial sector. The market is small to react. It's not as sensitive as if this happened in the US or these other developing markets. You'd see a reaction almost every day. But to me, when you sum it up, the damage is just too much. And for me, the damage goes beyond the institution, but it goes to even damage
the economy itself, you think?
The governor and his team.
And the individuals.
Yes.
And the individuals.
Yeah.
I'd like you to just hold it for a moment. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I know I put a question to you about how your matter ended up in court and what was decided. because our viewers would like to benefit from that process, to know that possibly everything, every possible avenue was taken and how it was resolved. Because, like I said earlier, that without the benefit of having the central bank itself explaining itself, either at press conferences or allowing to appear before on talk shows and be interviewed, we don't have the benefit to give all sides of the story. We'll take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll be taking messages. Send your messages, especially on our social media platforms. That will be an easier way to get your message through than letting phone calls come through. But I'll consult with the technical team to see how we can take your telephone calls. We'll be right back. Welcome back this last segment of the Fourth Estate. I have some messages which I'll start with reading. I have two guests in studios. I have Mr. Stephen Kaboyo. He's a financial expert. He's managing director at Alpha Capital Partners. And I have Mr. Chris Tushabe. He was published in the newspapers as the biggest data of the cooperative bank when it closed in 1999. For the last 20 years, he has moved to every possible office to try and make his case. I think I first met Chris Tushabe a few years ago over the same matter, complaining about the same matter, which is actually more than 7 years ago, over the same matter. And the Honorable Margaret Muhanga is watching us, and she says, I have followed Mr. Tushabe's story for the last 17 years.
Yes.
And I have a feeling he has a genuine case which needs attention. He has moved everywhere with all his documents, but has failed to get redress because of the syndicates that surround the sale of banks. Many people who don't have a genuine case give up after a short time, but his consistency raises suspicion that the bank may have erred somewhere. Nevertheless, the probe may unearth much more than we know. And then he talks about another case where someone was given a wrong bank balance and after died and had a wrong balance on the ATM slip. And when they threatened to raise the matters, the bank was able to apologize. The bank where she was, her husband was a customer, was able to apologize and try to correct the mistake. Let me say another message here from yes, Nteja Simu. Nteja says the reports about closed banks must be hidden somewhere. It appears Bank of Uganda has deliberately chosen not to submit them to Katuntu. That's Nteja Simwe. Nteja, thank you for your message. I'll be reading other messages as we move along, because we need to move along with the discussion that we have in studio tonight. I want to come back to you. So you complained, you went to the bank, you asked that you be listened to, but you also decided to go to court. Wasn't the matter resolved in court? I understand from what I've read.
This gives me an opportunity also. This corruption that has hurt us and has hurt our economy. I don't know whether this probe of Katuntu is an answered prayer. Listeners, I am a Christian believer. We prayed for such a probe. If people say it never happens, it has happened, it is a miracle. I don't know whether another probe will ever come into the judiciary. Now I'm going to answer your question. And I want to thank Honorable Muhanga. Definitely she has been there for us, for me, and she knows what I'm going through and what I have lost. Regarding court, I took my complaint to court that Bank of Uganda had refused to give me documents. And at the close of the bank, they said I owed the bank over 500 million, 578 million. As I went on, they kept on raising it 600 up to 801 million. That's what they were demanding from me without releasing a single document. Now I thought I was in trouble. What do I do?
You thought you were in trouble. You actually
Yes,
knew you were in
yes,
trouble.
I thought I was in trouble now. What do I do? I asked these people who were running the liquidation exercise if we could stop somewhere and have a partial consent. Remember, my office premises had been burnt, but fortunately there are some documents which were blown by fire and I had collected them.
They were blown by wind.
Yes.
Yes.
So we brought them together and bound them, and the liquidator had started doing his work, the official liquidator. So we brought these to 677 million, and I presented my documents which I had collected from the burnt office, and I had arranged them, and we reduced this from 801, 677 to 96 million only before any single document was released to me. And the liquidation exercise was still going on. When we signed this partial consent, they turned against me and said, you must pay all this first.
Did they pay to you back any money?
Not a single shilling yet up to this day. And this is how I paid 96. Because I had nothing to do, I was still begging them to give me some of these documents. I asked them to give me a schedule to pay this 96 million so that they can release my property, especially this one at Nakasero, which now houses Emily Pasha Hotel. They refused it. I borrowed 20 million and paid by check because they were demanding people to bring hard cash. And me, I thought those receipts could have been made down here, NASA. I paid the check. After 1 week, they returned that check to me. All these are records. What I'm talking about, viewers, whatever I'm talking about, I have a record of it. They returned this check after about 1 week. And remember, they were controlling the account on which this money was being drawn. They said they wanted hard cash. I suspected those cash receipts. I went to the Bank of Uganda, the cash office, purchased a draft, and brought and paid it and brought to them a receipt. They threw away my file and said they were not going to touch anything. They were going to give me more debits. Now remember, now it is 76 million remaining only.
After you had paid off the 20.
And they even wrote to me that they would not release that building, that property, until I pay 76 million in cash and not in installments. It is here. As I had nothing to do as a businessman, I had obligations, I had a family. So I bowed to pressure. They got me a buyer who's bought that property, $395,000 only. And they removed their 76 million.
So you must have.
That's how I suffered.
But
everything kept quiet. They never released any single document. My lorries were packed. Now, what happened again? That case went on. 204, when the liquidator, 201, I was invited to the office, one of the officials of the Bank of Uganda. They told me, loose, before the bank closed, we sent auditors, they collected documents, they are here, and maybe you can go and think how to get them. That's what they told me. And fortunately, they gave me a piece of paper to write, and they dictated what to write. They agreed that my documents had been extracted from my account, and that's what I wrote. And they had never been available to me. They gave me time to go and think how to get them. They sent me messages about how to give them money, which I can't go into detail because that one I have no proof about it. But I kept on appealing to them until 2004, December. That's when again I met Mrs. Justine Vagenda. And I want to thank God for Justine Vagenda because without her, I wouldn't be getting this energy to talk. She requested one of the officers to give me those documents. But the officer released only a few. And she gave them to me. And I even wrote, acknowledged, I said, these are few. because I had seen about 1.45 billion documents which the auditors had removed, and they were creating stories that I was involved in the frauds. That is another story. It is an interesting story. Now, when I got these documents, which were contained about 688 million, remember they had sold my property. I had been forced to sell my property for 76 million only. And now they are raising 688 million. When I put in my claim, I was, after they had been satisfied, I had given everything in writing, why I needed these documents, they had never been credited. But when I put in my claim, it was turned down that I was claiming money which had not been, which I had been paid. That's why I went to the president. The president.
Did the court give you any money?
This one not yet. I'm explaining. When the IGG investigated, the other case was going on. When the IGG was still investigating, judgment of the other case was given. When the IGG was still investigating this case. So when the IGG confirmed to the president that my money was legitimate, my claim was legitimate, the other case had already closed. So I opened a new case to claim this money. Now when I opened this case, it took about 4 years, 4 years or so. Adjournments. During one of the court sessions, the judge said that my file was too big and he did not have time for the file. It was a Friday afternoon, and he ordered me to bring a professional audit report by the next Monday into his court. He signed. Fortunately, I got a very good audit firm, Auckland Partners. They used to do some work for Bank of Uganda, and my papers at least were streamlined, including what the IGG had done. So they did me that report, and I registered it on Monday afternoon around
over the course of a weekend. They were able to produce an audit report.
Yes, exactly. And they charged me 13 million. It was a small report. So I beat off the time of the judge. The following court session, Bank of Uganda now left the claim that they had paid me this money, and then they said it is time bad and judicata. The judge decided that he would give judgment, his ruling, over notice, on notice, something like that. Every month, remember I stay in the village, I would come once every month to check, no notice. After about 6 months, I was arrested here in Kampala by court beliefs that I had lost that case. Bank of Uganda had won the case on technicalities, that is res judicata and time bad, and they needed 45 million. I pleaded with them, they reduced it to 34. I sold part of some of my properties and paid. I went to court to ask for documents, court records, so that I appeal out of time. The file got lost up to this day. That's why the president must come in.
Let me ask this question before I turn to Mr. Kaboyo.
It got lost up to this day.
Why do you think, Mr. Tushave, that you're so unlucky that everywhere you have turned, you haven't, you faced this kinds of roadblocks?
It's corruption.
I mean, because someone watching you,
yes,
or maybe listening to an alternative story, might not believe that you go to court, you get frustrated. You go to Bank of Uganda, you get frustrated. You went to the corporate, to your bank before it closed, you got frustrated, and you went to the president. You have.
I'm part of the intercessors that are praying for Uganda. This government has done very well in other things. But I thank God for the president. He's realizing this. And for you people who are saying that this probe should not have taken place, even the president would not have stopped it. It is God-given.
Okay.
Because it is corruption.
Okay.
What else can I have as an example? A judge orders you to bring a report, and you bring it. It gives you a very short time, very unfair. It was Friday afternoon. You bring it. He reads it. He says, these people really gave you the documents. At least I would have expected if it was dismissed at no costs. But anyway,
So
these are complaints. These
the
are
35 million
grants.
was cost.
I paid
Okay.
it over, and I looked for the file. Up to this day, that file got lost. This
Okay.
is Uganda, Mr. President. This is Uganda. Save us. Some of us who have decided to fight corruption, and we have really done it. We need protection.
Okay. Let me come back to Mr. Kaboyo. This is a question from, a comment rather, from Agaba Bills. He's watching us. And he says, COSASE is not a new committee. What did the previous committees do? And he says, I'm not very enthusiastic about the developments until there is action to implement the recommendations of the committee. How do you respond to Mr. Agaba Bills?
I think COSASE is doing what they have to do. They are interrogating. They have investigated, and I'm sure once the probe is all done, they'll make recommendations, and a report will be debated in the plenary, and Parliament will be able to uphold some of those recommendations that they think are relevant. So it is not it's not a waste of time, and it's not really just sitting before a committee and presenting, and nothing effective comes out of it. We've seen reports before that recommendations have been adopted in the plenary, but I think the point here is given the independence of the central bank, independence comes in a different framework, but oversight by elected leaders is acceptable. And I think it is, like I said, it's not just a waste of time and resources. The checks and balances now that we see being established will be useful for the central bank to be able to pick up from there and make fundamental reforms, especially at the supervision level. I think one of the technical failures, has been what I explained before, this sort of group decision making. When you look at monetary policy implementation or decisions are made in a committee. What stops supervision issues to be debated in a committee made up by a diversified
team of technical people?
Absolutely.
Yes. If you were in the COSASE lead councils, they have an equivalent of a lead council in this case, or the chairman of COSASE, what questions would you be asking of the central bank?
I think there are three fundamental questions that I would ask. One is the type of resolutions, bank resolutions that were adopted in all the 7 banks. Was there room for corrective action to say, look, just like Mr. Tushabe was saying, shareholders in cooperative bank wanted to capitalize the bank. Were they given an opportunity? Maybe that could have been a corrective action, and the bank would not have been closed. So were there corrective actions that were considered? 2, are all these resolutions, were they done in an orderly fashion, orderly manner? Was taxpayers' money exposed? Were there risks to the entire financial system or contagion issues? So those would be the questions that I would ask. But again, the whole issue of confidence and trust going forward, it needs to be emphasized here, because, like I said, it is very easy to see loss of public trust in the many operations of the
Let me
bank.
flip that same question to you again, and I have 2 more questions for you before we get out of here. I'm being told that our time is out.
Yeah.
If you were sitting as part of the team from the central bank, what would be your expectations of COSASE?
Really, the issue is COSASE is asking all the right questions. How do
Do you think Governor Mutevile, Deputy Governor Louis Kasekende, former Director Bank Supervision, and the other team think COSASE is asking the right questions?
Now, I think they have realized that the questions that are being asked are genuine questions, because you don't close a bank for 20 years and there's no liquidation report. You have to be able to account. Where is the accountability? Now, the COSASE has raised a lot of issues where underhand or heavy hand methods have been used. It's okay. I mean, supervision, they can apply their macro-prudential rule book, but you need to interface with people like him who have been victims of this long, prolonged complaints. Where is the closure? So for me, if I was a Bank of Uganda official, I would expect to be questioned the way it is coming out. But the issue is there is no group. What I realize from the outside is that the technical teams are not together.
Okay.
There are gaps in the legal opinions that are being expressed by the officials of the central bank. There are contradictions. Those are not good things to see
coming out in a public gallery.
Yes.
Okay. Just one last question to you before we get out of here, because our time is pretty much out. I want to read the message. Yeah, I'll read this message after I've asked the question to you. One of the things that I'm urging that hasn't been paid attention to is Chris and people like him, the story of Chris and people like him, which is the management of the loan book. From what we have been able to glean from the Auditor General's report and from other leaks that are coming out, is that this is possibly one of the most lucrative assets in a liquidated bank, the loan book. I think the loans of some of the banks were sold to Nile Acquisition, a company, an outfit called Nile Acquisition, that people, we saw it with, I think the Argentinian debt some years back. Argentina was so indebted that when a country is so indebted, it can sell someone, the creditors can sell the debt to another debt collector. So you owe somebody money, you have failed to collect it, you sell it to me, and I will find a way. I think there was a ship, an Argentinian ship that was arrested with the wrong word, grabbed by over the date. The management, what question should be asked about the debt book of a bank after its liquidation? Yes,
I think it gets a little technical because there's a standard finance practice. It's called a haircut. When loans are sold at the secondary market, the investor or the person who buys those loans takes certain risks, and there are many unknowns in those risks, because here he's going to use his best efforts to be able to collect, and therefore he'll price the loans from that institution at a discount. But the discount should not be abnormal, like what I've been seeing, 95% discount. Margins are allowed because this person is putting his capital at risk, because he runs the risk of not even selling
So an institution owes 125 billion in debt.
Yes.
And you apply your 95%. So he pays 9 billion and says, forget about the 117, about there?
Yes.
117 billion. Let me find a way to collect it. So if he's able to, that's what you're calling the haircut, that if I'm able to collect 100 billion out of this, my luck. If I'm able to collect only 1 billion, I lose my 8 billion. Is that what you're trying to explain?
True.
Yes.
And there's a bit of a gray area there because how do you determine the discount? For me, if I was going to put my capital at risk, I'll demand a reasonable discount. But like I said, the gray area is that there could be collusion between the buyer of the loans and the person who is selling the debt.
Okay.
Now that one, you can't really put a finger to it.
I'm afraid our time is out. We need to get out of here. Let me take this message. I'm being told that we need to get out of here because both of you, I would have loved to discuss the question of the mortgaged assets and how they've been managed in the question of these closed banks. But since the COSASE probe is still an ongoing probe, I believe we'll have an opportunity to discuss it with our viewers. Emmanuel Tugume is watching us from Fort Portal and says, thanks for the show, Charles. Thank you, Emmanuel. Recent COSASE findings about the conflict of interest by Bank of Uganda staff exposed the malpractices in the central bank. Emmanuel, I'm not sure we can conclude that yet because we do not know how the COSASE probe will end and what kind of findings they will make and recommendations. Teja Sima got back to us and says, I am keenly watching Mr. Chris Tushabe. He is 1,000,000% right. He succumbed to the pangs of corruption. You cannot dismiss his claim. I'll take another message or two and then I'll come to Chris and we end this show. Yeah, Emmanuel, I've taken your message. Someone wants to get Mr. Chris Chavez's contact. He'll decide if he wants to share it with you after the show. I want to come back to you, Mr. Chavez. Basically, to wrap up and close because we are short of time.
Thank you very much, Charles. I've told you that when we agreed on a partial consent, it was 96 million, and my property was sold and the money was paid. Remember, I had mortgaged properties over 1.4 billion for that loan, which was now closed. Now, up to today, they are still, Bank of Uganda is still holding my properties. There were 2 properties at Kasese. They recently wanted to sell them illegally, and it is President's office which stopped them. Now another question is, at the time of the closure of this bank, President directed that clients with their money should be paid. Now this other money, 600 million include, when you put in interest, it comes to over 5 billion shillings, which have been claiming. Bank of Uganda at first said they had paid me the money. Later on, they proved that it was not true. Now, honestly, coming to put in a technicality, it is the story of the wolf and the lamb. I recently wrote to the governor and told him, Governor Tumusime Mutebire, I told you that it is not what we expect of the integrity of the National Bank to cheat me this money. Please think about it again. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris Tushabe. Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Kaboyo, for making time for the show. Thank you very much to all our viewers. There are issues we didn't discuss. Of course, the President weighed in on this probe and said he had warned Bank of Uganda about the closure of Crane Bank in a cabinet meeting. We didn't go into that detail. And of course, would like to congratulate Ugandan Queen Abenacho, who went tops in the Miss World competition. Those might look like simple things, but they're important for this country and especially for the promotion of tourism in the country. From me, it is a good night, and I'd like to thank the production crew and, of course, the 2 dangerous substitutes that were able to stand in for me when I was away over the last 2 Sundays. So Barbara Mong and Shifa Mwesije, thank you very much for the wonderful job done to host the show over the last 2 Sundays. Good night.
NTV, turning on your world.